The Forbidden City in Beijing was the center of the Chinese Empire, a maze of red walls and golden roofs that housed the most powerful men in the world. Yet for nearly 5 decades, the true ruler of this immense empire was not a man who sat on the dragon throne. It was a woman who was supposed to be silent and powerless. Her name was Cixi. She began her life as a girl from a simple family, a minor noble with no wealth and no fame. She entered the Forbidden City as a low-ranking concubine, a person whose only job was to serve the emperor and hopefully give him children. But Cixi was more clever, more ambitious, and more ruthless than every man in the palace. She played the game of power like no one before or after her. For 47 years, Cixi would control the fate of over 400 million people, making and breaking emperors while hiding her true power from the world. She was the person who brought the last great dynasty of China, the Qing Dynasty, into the modern age. But she did it in a world that was collapsing around her. She was a master of political secrets, known for having opponents quietly removed and for spending the country's money on massive, beautiful pleasure projects, like a marble boat built on a lake. How did a low-ranking palace girl rise up to become the absolute ruler of the vast Chinese empire? How did she manage to control the most powerful men in the world while officially staying in the shadows, always ruling from behind a curtain? And was she the savior who fought for China's survival, or the selfish ruler who ultimately caused its final dramatic collapse? To understand the forgotten power of Empress Cixi, we must first look at the unique, dangerous world she walked into. The Forbidden City was a world of rigid rules. The emperor was considered the son of heaven, a divine figure whose power could not be questioned. No woman was supposed to have any role in governing the empire. Yet, Cixi found a way to use the rules against the men who wrote them. Her first and most important job was to get the emperor's attention. This was a difficult task for a low-ranking girl competing against hundreds of other beautiful and well-born women in the palace. In the palace, favor was everything, and the only way to gain permanent, unbreakable favor was to produce a male heir, a son who could one day become the next emperor. In 1856, after years of trying, Cixi gave birth to the emperor's only surviving son. This one event changed the entire course of Chinese history. She was no longer just a concubine. She was the mother of the heir. This single fact gave her a political identity that nobody could take away. This boy was her ticket to power, but she would still have to wait for the death of the emperor himself to finally claim the throne. The quiet palace rooms of the Forbidden City were about to become the stage for a spectacular and deadly power grab. Cixi was the mother of the heir, but simply having a son did not guarantee her power. The politics inside the palace were a complex, silent war. Cixi had to deal with the emperor's main wife, the empress consort, later known as Empress Dowager Cixi, who held the official title, and with the powerful men of the royal family who saw Cixi as an outsider. Cixi spent years cultivating her influence. She was known to be extremely smart, with a sharp memory and a deep interest in the actual business of ruling. Most palace women were kept away from state documents, but Cixi taught herself to read state papers and government reports. When the emperor was busy or unwell, Cixi would often look over the documents herself, quietly learning the secrets of the empire's administration. She listened far more than she spoke, and she didn't often take time to read state papers, absorbing all the necessary knowledge to eventually take control. The opportunity she had been waiting for arrived in 1861. The emperor, who was still relatively young, became seriously ill and died. This death was not just a tragedy for the family, it was a massive crisis for the entire Qing dynasty. According to tradition, the late emperor's son, Cixi's 5-year-old boy, would automatically become the new emperor, known as the Tongji Emperor. But a 5-year-old cannot rule an empire. Therefore, a group of 8 powerful traditional court officials and princes were appointed to serve as the regents, meaning they would rule for the child until he grew up. These 8 regents hated Cixi. They saw her as a dangerous, low-born woman who had gotten lucky. They immediately tried to isolate her and her son, refusing to let her have any say in government. They planned to keep the real power for themselves, believing they could easily control the young child and sideline the boy's ambitious mother. But Cixi was prepared. She knew the ancient laws and rules of the dynasty better than the regents did. She knew that, according to tradition, the late emperor's wives and mother figures had to be involved in decisions concerning the boy emperor. This gave her the perfect legal weapon. Cixi formed a secret alliance with the official Empress Dowager Cixi, the former emperor's main wife. Cixi had the brains and the ambition. Cixi had the legal title and respect. Together, they plotted against the 8 men who held the power. The struggle was silent but deadly. Cixi used her knowledge of palace politics and her allies in the military. She waited until the funeral procession for the late emperor left the capital, ensuring the 8 regents were separated from their main forces. While they were traveling, Cixi and Cixi moved quickly. They issued secret orders to key military commanders who were loyal to them. When the regents finally returned to the capital, they found the entire palace under the control of troops loyal to the 2 dowagers. Cixi and Cixi then had the 8 regents arrested and charged them with plotting against the young emperor. This palace takeover is known in history as the Xinyo coup of 1861. Cixi did not simply exile her enemies. She ordered the execution or forced suicide of the main leaders among the 8 regents. This act was brutal, swift, and sent a clear message to everyone in the Forbidden City. Challenge Cixi and you will die. After the coup, Cixi and Cixi took over as the co-regents for the young Tongji Emperor. Cixi had won the first round, moving from a position of near powerless widow to one of the 2 most powerful people in the entire empire. She had earned her place at the center of the Forbidden City's massive power structure. Now, she would invent a brand new, terrifying way to rule the greatest nation in Asia. When the young emperor was required to attend meetings with the highest court officials, the ministers and scholars who ran the day-to-day business of the empire, Cixi and Cixi would also be present. However, they would not sit in the main room. Instead, they sat on a low platform hidden behind a silk screen or a thick yellow curtain. The young emperor sat on the main throne, but he was just a child. When an official knelt and gave a report, the emperor would pretend to listen. Then he would turn and look at the curtain behind him. The officials in the room could not see the dowagers, but they could clearly hear Cixi's sharp, powerful voice giving the real orders. The emperor would then simply repeat Cixi's words to the official. In public, it looked like the emperor was ruling with the wise counsel of his mother figures. In reality, every law, every appointment, and every military decision came directly from Cixi's mind, hidden behind that curtain. This clever arrangement allowed Cixi to obey the letter of the law. She was not sitting on the dragon throne, while completely controlling the soul of the empire. This system immediately faced 2 major problems that Cixi had to solve through sheer will. the threat of foreign invaders, and the weakness of her co-regent. The weakness came from her partner, Empress Dowager Cixi. Cixi was kind, well-liked, and held the highest official rank, but she was not interested in politics. She was content to let Cixi do the hard work of governing. Cixi, with her ambition and tireless mind, quickly became the dominant voice behind the curtain. Cixi was her necessary shield, lending legitimacy to the power grab. But Cixi was the true engine of the empire. The greater threat came from outside. The Qing dynasty was failing. Europe and the West, the British, the French, the Americans, were stronger than ever, and they wanted to carve up China into small pieces for trade. The Chinese army was weak, their technology was old, and the empire had just lost a devastating war, making it vulnerable. Cixi realized quickly that the old, rigid ways of the Chinese court would not work anymore. She had to modernize China to save the dynasty. She supported projects to learn about Western science and to build new factories, shipyards, and railways. This was a massive change for a country that considered all outsiders barbarians. Cixi was a fierce traditionalist, but she was also a practical survivor. She knew China could not survive if it stayed stuck in the past. Despite this push for modernization, Cixi's rule was always deeply personal. Her power was absolute, and she allowed no rivals. When her son, the Tongjing Emperor, grew up, he naturally wanted to rule China himself. But Cixi had no intention of handing over the empire she had fought so hard to control. The struggle between mother and son was silent, constant, and heartbreaking. When the young Tongji Emperor died suddenly in 1875, Cixi faced her second major crisis. Her power was entirely linked to her son, and now he was gone. According to the dynastic rules of the Qing dynasty, the next emperor had to be from the next generation down, a cousin or a nephew, so that the rituals honoring the deceased emperor, Cixi's son, could be carried out correctly. Cixi needed a new puppet, but she also needed to ensure that no one could challenge her position as the ultimate mother of the dynasty. Her solution was a bold and illegal move that cemented her absolute control over China for another generation. Cixi ignored the proper rules and chose the son of her sister. This meant the new emperor, the Guangxu Emperor, was actually Cixi's nephew, not her son's cousin. More importantly, she chose a boy who was just 4 years old. By choosing a 4-year-old nephew, Cixi broke the rules, but she won the game. She placed a small child on the throne who needed her to rule for him. And because he was technically her nephew, not her son, she was not obligated to step aside when he became an adult. She could, and did, simply continue her system of ruling from behind the curtain. This time of her regency lasted for over 2 decades. Cixi proved herself to be one of the most hardworking and powerful minds the Qing dynasty had ever known. She would wake up before dawn, spend hours meeting with officials, and pore over state papers. She managed vast projects, like the attempt to build a modern navy and new factories, all while fighting deep corruption inside her own court. The problem Cixi faced was that the entire world was changing too fast for China to keep up. While Cixi supported some modernization, her main goal was always to keep the Qing dynasty and her own power safe. This meant she often fought against the true deep changes China desperately needed. For example, Cixi saw the new railways and factories as necessary evils, but she hated the ideas of democracy and freedom that came with them. She trusted the old ways. The old scholars, and the old laws, far more than any new Western idea. She was caught between two worlds, trying to modernize China's tools without modernizing China's mind. This internal struggle led to massive, costly mistakes. The most famous mistake involved the Beiyang fleet. The magnificent new navy, Cixi, had approved to be built with Western technology. This was meant to be the pride of China and its shield against foreign powers. But Cixi was also obsessed with luxury and her own image. As the dynasty's money ran low, Cixi decided to divert a massive amount of funds, money that was specifically meant for upgrading and maintaining the Navy's modern ships, to rebuild the luxurious summer palace gardens for herself. One of the most famous examples of this spending was a lavish marble boat she commissioned for the palace grounds. The lack of funding meant the Navy's powerful ships could not be properly maintained or rearmed. When China went to war with Japan in 1894, the Japanese Navy, though smaller, was better trained and had new ammunition. The Chinese Beiyang fleet, the one Cixi had skimped on, was destroyed. This loss humiliated China and proved that Cixi's personal focus on luxury had cost the nation its safety. Even as foreign powers grew stronger, Cixi maintained her absolute grip on the Forbidden City. When the young Guangxu emperor reached adulthood, he tried to seize back control from his aunt. He launched the 100 Days Reform, a bold effort to rapidly change China's government, military, and education system. He wanted to push China into the modern world. Cixi watched from behind the curtain. She saw the reforms as a direct threat to her authority and the traditions she valued. She acted swiftly. In another ruthless move, Cixi launched a counter-coup, arrested the young emperor, and declared that he was mentally unfit to rule. She placed him under permanent house arrest, effectively ending his power after only 103 days. Cixi was back in total control. She was over 60 years old, and she had now successfully overthrown two rulers to maintain her power. But even the absolute power of the Empress Dowager would soon be tested by a violent, patriotic rebellion that brought foreign armies marching right into the Forbidden City. Cixi had maintained her personal control, but the price for the empire was high. The internal weakness and the external threats mounted with every passing year. China had been losing wars and signing humiliating treaties, forced to give up land and money to foreign powers. These losses created intense anger and shame among the common people, who felt the dynasty was powerless to protect them. This anger exploded into a massive, violent uprising known as the Boxer Rebellion, starting around 1899. The Boxers were a large group of Chinese peasants and martial artists who hated all things foreign: foreign religion, foreign businesses, and foreign people. They practiced special martial arts and believed they had magical protection from foreign bullets. They attacked Christian Chinese people, foreign missionaries, and foreign embassies, killing thousands. Cixi faced a terrifying choice: to stop the Boxers, use her own army to crush the rebellion, which would make her look weak to her own people and force her to side with the hated foreigners, and support the Boxers, side with the patriotic rebels, which would mean declaring war on every major world power at once. In a move that historians still debate, Cixi sided with the rebels. She saw the Boxers as a tool, a way to channel the popular anger against the foreigners who were trying to destroy the Qing dynasty. In 1900, she officially declared war against the Eight-Nation Alliance, including Britain, France, Germany, Japan, and the United States. This was a colossal gamble, and Cixi lost badly. The Eight-Nation Alliance was far too strong. They quickly assembled a massive international army and marched directly toward Beijing. The small, disorganized boxer groups, despite their belief in magic, were no match for the modern guns and coordinated forces of the foreign armies. The foreign troops smashed through the Chinese defenses and entered Beijing. They rampaged through the city, and many of the foreign soldiers even entered the Forbidden City itself, the most sacred place in the empire. As the foreign cannons began to shake the palace walls, Empress Cixi, along with the young Guangxu emperor, was forced to flee for her life. This was the ultimate humiliation for the divine ruler of China. In the middle of the night, disguised as a peasant woman, Cixi and her small party slipped out through the back gates of the Forbidden City. They abandoned their silks, gold, and fancy carriages, escaping on simple carts. They traveled hundreds of miles to the western city of Xi'an, where they set up a temporary capital. Cixi was effectively a refugee in her own vast empire. This long, dangerous journey taught Cixi a harsh lesson. China was not strong enough to defeat the world. She had to swallow her pride and beg for peace. The peace treaty that ended the Boxer Rebellion was one of the most painful in Chinese history. It forced the Qing dynasty to pay a massive fine, an incredible sum of money that would cripple the Chinese economy for decades. It also allowed foreign nations to permanently station troops inside Beijing, a constant insult to the Empress and the dynasty. Cixi had returned to the Forbidden City 1 year after the Boxer Rebellion, humbled but still in absolute control. She realized that she could no longer protect the dynasty by clinging to the old ways. The only way to survive was to finally accept the modernization she had resisted for so long. She now began a period of true, rapid reform called the New Policies. She ordered the end of the old imperial exam system, a 1,000-year-old tradition for choosing officials. She began drafting a real constitution and planned for a parliament where elected officials would eventually have a voice. She even supported rights for women that had been unheard of in China before. Cixi, the ultimate conservative, became the most radical reformer in the dynasty's final years. But these changes, though sweeping and fast, came far too late to save the fate of the 300-year-old Qing dynasty. The people had lost faith in the royal family after the humiliation of the Boxer Rebellion, and the empire was financially broken by the massive war payments Cixi had been forced to agree to. Cixi, now in her 70s, was fighting against time. She remained the center of all power, fiercely controlling the reform process. She would meet with foreign ambassadors, something no previous empress had ever done. And she would pose for photographs using the new Western technology to show the world the new, modern face of the Chinese dynasty. Despite her efforts to change China, she could never completely change herself. She remained ruthless and suspicious. The final act of Cixi's life is perhaps the most mysterious and dark. In November 1908, the young Guangxu emperor, the nephew she had placed under house arrest for daring to challenge her, became suddenly and violently ill. He died on November 14th. The very next day, November 15th, Empress Dowager Cixi herself died. The timing of these two deaths has fueled historical whispers for over a century. Many people believed and continue to believe that Cixi, knowing she was dying, ordered her nephew to be poisoned first. Why? Because she knew that once she was gone, the emperor who hated her would take the throne and immediately reverse all the policies she had worked so hard on in her final years. To ensure her vision for China continued, she may have simply removed the final threat to her power. Whatever the truth, Cixi made one last critical choice before she died. She named the very last emperor of China. she chose a small, 2-year-old boy named Pu Yi. By choosing a tiny child, Cixi ensured that the powerful men she trusted would have time to rule as regents, guaranteeing her influence would continue for at least another decade. Cixi was controlling the empire even from her deathbed, leaving China with a 2-year-old on the dragon throne and an empire tearing itself apart. Cixi, the girl who climbed the ladder of power through one male heir, died using another tiny boy to secure her final dynastic wishes. Cixi's final dramatic move was to leave the 2-year-old Pu Yi on the throne. This was meant to save the dynasty, but it had the opposite effect. Her death removed the one absolute center of power and stability. Just 3 years later, in 1911, the empire exploded into revolution. The Qing dynasty, which had stood for almost 300 years, finally fell apart, ending the thousands of years of imperial rule in China. Cixi is still one of the most debated figures in all of Asian history. Was she the evil figure that many later historians painted her to be? Or was she the capable leader who did the impossible in an impossible time? She was a masterful politician and a brilliant survivor. Cixi rose from the very bottom of a system designed to keep women powerless. She was the one person who constantly fought to modernize China's military and factories. She was a protector of the dynasty, maintaining stability for over 40 years during a period when the empire should have collapsed much earlier. Her political cunning and strength were unmatched. Cixi's methods were brutal, and her priorities were often selfish. She ordered the execution of her enemies and crushed true reform when it challenged her own power. Her selfish spending on the Summer Palace directly led to the destruction of China's best navy. She consistently chose personal power over the long-term good of the nation, and her actions left China weak, broken, and ready for revolution. Ultimately, Empress Dowager Cixi remains one of the most important, powerful, and forgotten women in world history. She started as a girl who was supposed to be silent, and ended as the woman whose final choices determined the destiny of China. Her story is the perfect example of how one determined person, ruling from behind a curtain, can hold the power of an entire Asian dynasty in her hands.